Hello kids, Mr. Young here with Chapter 26, Lesson 4, Part 1. This lesson is called The World Enters a New Century, which of course will be a reference to the year 2000. So this lesson is going to be interesting, and here's why. It's supposed to end where we're at in history, but it's like 10 years ago, so a lot has happened since this book was made. For example, the re-election of Barack Obama is the last thing, sort of in terms of presidents, that this lesson in particular is going to go over. So that's fun. We know things have changed a little bit since then. Also, this lesson covers September 11th, which is always a touchy subject, but we'll get through it just fine because we're consummate professionals. September 11th on that note happened when I was about your age. So let's do it, shall we? I'm a little sick today. We can power through. Alright, so the world, it keeps on turning. I think I got a globe here. So there we go. The world just keeps on turning. Yeah, things keep changing, always changing. And the world continues to get smaller and smaller, much like this globe. What do I mean? Well, back 100 years ago, there's so much that you couldn't do. For example, now I can go on the internet and buy an illegal copy of Pittsburgh Penguins hockey jersey from a Chinese factory, and I could do it all in a couple of minutes, assuming their web domain still exists. Or, my brother moved to Washington, D.C. I could talk to him face to face every single day, and I often do. He can see his nephew, my son, every day thanks to technology. We FaceTime every day. So the world in that way is getting smaller. Technology and transportation and things like that. But on top of that, the face of evil, as we say, has changed here in the West. For our parents and their parents, it was the Soviet Union. We spent like a whole chapter, weeks talking about the Soviet Union and how they were the enemy. Well, the Soviet Union fell in 1991, leaving the U.S. as the sole superpower of the world. Who would be the new enemy? We found out on September 11th, 2001. Terrorism is the new enemy, and it has been ever since that day. They have no uniform, no home country, they have no conscience and no rules. They are the evil of our age, terrorists. On September 11th, I was in second period study hall when it happened. There was a lot of confusion that day, and we have the advantage of retrospect now. 4 planes were hijacked by Islamist militants belonging to Al-Qaeda. 2 crashed into the World Trade Center in downtown New York City. 1 crashed in the Pentagon, and another one crashed in Somerset, Pennsylvania, when the passengers basically tried to take the plane back. They aren't sure where that one was headed, but they were fairly certain it was headed for the capital. Their leader was a rich Saudi, Osama bin Laden, who has since been killed by the United States Special Forces. Alright, so September 11th happens, thus begins the GWAT. That's what we call it in the military, the Global War on Terror. Then President George W. Bush made his famous Axis of Evil speech. He told the world that you're either with us or you're against us. Then began the 10-year terror of the U.S. through the Middle East. Afghanistan came first, basically blew the Taliban away, and then we moved on. Well, let's make sure we go through this in order. Afghanistan's still a mess to this very day. Back, I believe it was in 2003, the U.S. invaded Iraq and dethroned Saddam Hussein. We went into Iraq because it was said that Saddam had ties to Al-Qaeda and bin Laden, and that he had weapons of mass destruction, or as we call them, WMDs. We never found those WMDs, but the word on the street is they're what Bashar al-Assad is using in Syria today. They were moved into Syria. That's what they say. I don't know the truth of it. After a swift butt-kicking of Saddam's forces in the initial invasion of Iraq back in 2003, coalition forces led by the U.S. Went about nation-building in Iraq, trying to build a successful democracy. It didn't really turn out very well. Everyone pulled out of Iraq in 2011. And they say this withdrawal in part led to the rise of the Islamic State, better known as ISIS, and the short of it is Iraq is not a place you want to be now. Well, going back further, a little further back in the timeline, back in the 90s. So the GWOT, the Global War on Terror, was not the first time the U.S. had been involved in Iraq. Back in 1990, Saddam Hussein invaded his neighbors to the south, who had a lot of oil. This country was called Kuwait. This threatened the world supply of oil, and the U.S. and an alliance of other nations quickly sent a force back to take Kuwait, and they blew through Kuwait and into Iraq and decimated the Iraqi military. Oh, I said, like a pack of hungry teenagers at a pizza party. You can imagine, they're so hungry. So they blew through there, but they did not dethrone Saddam. And that's really the Persian Gulf War. So it was, sometimes people call it the second Iraq, the second Gulf War. No, you don't hear that a lot, though. Alright, Asia, a growing economic power. So India has this rapidly growing economic power. The economy is growing. India has a massive population. A lot of them are educated, and a lot of them speak English. So you have this educated population of English-speaking people. There's a lot of people, so labor costs are low. That means you don't have to pay them a lot because there's all kinds of people to take that job. So you have too many people, wages go down. And so for that reason, India is a very popular country for U.S. companies to outsource. What does this mean? Well, it means that there are certain jobs that you can have sent to India instead of having Americans do it, because it's cheaper. They have all those people, so labor costs are low. So if, say, your printer breaks and you call tech support, you very well might get a guy from India working in a cubicle farm. And he'll speak English, and he will be able to help you with your printer. But they hire Indians to do it because they can pay them less than they would Americans. This is outsourcing. You've been hearing about it a little more, particularly during the presidential campaign. Japan, in terms of Asian economic superpowers, Japan was really the first economic, or Asia of the Asian countries to become an economic powerhouse, basically after the U.S. helped them to rebuild after World War II. They took care of themselves pretty quickly. Today you hear Japan most often associated with the high-tech industries. Japan suffered a major setback in 2011 when they had a giant tsunami, basically underwater earthquake, massive tidal wave, destroy a lot of the Japanese coast, including their, I believe their Fukushima nuclear power plant. They've been having a lot of problems with that because their nuclear power plant was damaged. Here it is. It's never good when your nuclear power plant catches fire. Over in Europe, they tried to bind together in a partnership known as the European Union. Europe, Western Europe in particular, had done very well economically for a long time because they were imperialists. And they relied on basically holdings of land elsewhere to make money. And after World War II and that all ended, they're kind of still finding their way in the world. So they bound together into a sort of almost this common economic entity known as the EU, the European Union. They had a shared common currency, the euro dollar. And they all kind of have to live under the same set of rules. And in terms of the country themselves, they still find their way. So they've elected conservative leaders, they've elected progressive leaders, and no one really has seemed to have found the solution to their problems yet. How to have a thriving economy in this non-imperialist world. Let's see, you have the map here of the EU. Britain, the UK rather, is actually no longer a part of the EU. They voted to leave in a referendum known as Brexit, the Britain exit. Over here in the US, we're shooting back to the 80s. It's been quite a ride. In the 80s, Ronald Reagan was president. Reagan was a pretty conservative guy. He cut social programs and taxes, but increased military spending. Now, in order to do this, because he had cut taxes, the U.S. had to borrow money for the military buildup, increasing the national debt. Reagan was very popular, and his vice president, George Bush, won the presidency in 1988, basically riding the coattails of that popularity. However, Bush faced an economic downturn, and in 1992, a moderate Democrat named Bill Clinton became president. Clinton balanced the budget and went through some social program reforms. He basically reformed the whole welfare system. Clinton served for 2 terms, so 8 years, and then executive power switched back to Republican control in 2000 with George W. Bush, who was the son of the former president, George Bush. George W. Bush's presidency was mostly dominated by the War on Terror. After 2 terms of that and a whole lot of war, people were pretty sick of that, pretty sick of Republicans, and as is the case, power switched back to the other party. That's when you had President Barack Obama in control. And he did 2 terms. Such is the case again, 8 years of one power and executive control, and it switched back to Republican with President Donald Trump. Take note, students, very seldom does one political party hold power for more than 8 years in the White House. It's just how it tends to shift. Republicans control, they usually get 2 terms, and by the end of it, everyone's like, oh, we're sick of Republicans. We're going to vote to Democrats. And then they do Democrats for 8 years, and then by the time that's over, they go, we're sick of Democrats. We want Republicans. It's kind of a good way to help everything balance out. You can see here, it's been like this for 100 years. Switching back and forth, and it will be red here. See, this ends after Barack Obama's first election. Alright, hey, that's it for today. Sort of a weird wish-wash of different things. Tomorrow, I hope we bring it all together when we talk about sort of globalization in the global community with part 2 of the lesson. That's for today. Here on the very next page, you have a short quiz. Just a 5-pointer. So that's a short one. If you have any questions, feel free to get a hold of me. We don't have much left in the textbook. But that's okay, because we're getting towards the end of the year. Have a wonderful day. Feel free to look up any these topics that we've talked about in more detail, like the first Gulf War, September 11th, anything like that. There's plenty of information on all this stuff because it wasn't that long ago. Alright, have a good one.